How the UK fishing industry has been hammered by being a member of the European Union. Website here, britishseafishing.co.uk. Let's just take a look at one of the paragraphs in this article. Before joining the EEC in 1973, Britain, like most other countries in the world, controlled its own fishing waters. This was a zone extended 200 nautical miles from the country's coastline, an area known as the country's exclusive economic zone. With EEC membership, Britain would control a zone just 12 miles from the UK coastline, with the rest of Britain's waters now part of Europe's combined exclusive economic zone controlled by the EEC. So how has this affected the British fishing industry? This is a House of Commons Library briefing paper from 2017, UK Sea Fisheries Statistics. So let's take a look at the important points in this as highlighted here. We'll read from here. The UK is a net importer of fish, with net imports of around 290,000 tonnes in 2016, worth £1.4 billion. Isn't that crazy? An island nation surrounded by water, not just water, some of the best fishing waters in Europe and indeed the world. We are surrounded by water, but we are net importer of fish. Obviously, we can't catch every fish, from the UK. There's going to be certain species, certain types you're going to have to always import. But to be importing 290,000 tonnes worth £1.4 billion, that is just insane. So let's look at the stats here. This is the stats of landings going back since 1895 to 2017. As you can see, almost just up until about 1960, it was pretty flat. Yes, it went up. Yes, it went down. It spiked down for both world wars, spiking down for First World War and Second World War. But up pretty much flat until about mid-70s, the time we joined the EEC, which later became the EU. Then it just started downtrending. And what caused this downtrend? Let's take a look at another article in this document. We'll read the highlighted part. The study estimates that an average of 58% of fish and shellfish caught in UK waters were landed by fishing boats from other EU countries each year between 2012 and 2014. This is said to represent around 650,000 tonnes of fish and shellfish, worth over £400 million each year. In the same period, UK fishing boats were estimated to have landed an average of 90,000 tonnes of fish and shellfish worth 100 million caught in other EU member state waters each year. So obviously, being part of the EU, UK fishermen can go to other waters and fish those as well. But UK fishermen are pulling out nowhere near the amount of fish from other waters than we're basically being seen off in this deal, right? There's a lot more European fishermen coming to UK waters than there are UK fishermen going to other waters. It's a huge difference. It's the difference between 650,000 and 90,000 tonnes. So it's absolutely massive. It's absolutely massive. UK fishermen are losing out hand over fist. Some employment data here. So this is just the downtrend in number of fishermen employed part-time and full-time from 1938 to 2016. Obviously, you can expect some efficiency over time. Yes, maybe some jobs will go because, trawlers can get bigger, they can have less staff, GPS, computerization, less people. But it's just continual downtrend, right? We know we're pulling out less fish each year. So people are losing jobs, and they're losing jobs from areas which often don't have many other industries. These isolated, coastal towns. Fishing was always, probably the main employer. If not the main employer, then people indirectly employed by fishing. People servicing equipment, making nets, feeding and housing fishermen. So it's all direct. As you lose an industry, expect the whole local economy to collapse if you take away the main driving force, which brings about employment, brings about prosperity to these areas. Know that it's also got data in this document about how fish are being, overcaught. Too many fish coming out of the water, especially cod. Cod is the top fish there. It's red most years. Red most years means suffering reduced reproductive capacity, i.e. they're pulling so many fish out of the water that fish just aren't having an opportunity to reproduce, and therefore fish stocks go down. So if we got to a point in the future, which at the moment would only happen under a no-deal Brexit, but hopefully in the future we get to a point where the UK can decide how it wants its UK waters to be fished. We don't want UK water to be fished to a point that fish stocks start collapsing, but this is what happens when you allow other EU nations to come and fish your waters. You know, they obviously don't really care. If you're coming up from Portugal, you're coming up from Spain, Spanish fishermen, why would you really care that much about UK fishing waters? Because if you completely deplete the UK, you just go and fish somewhere else. Fish out in the North Atlantic. Yes, it may be other species, but they don't really care that much. So it's critical for the UK to make sure its own fish stocks aren't being depleted. There's another interesting story here from BBC News. UK fish discard ban cannot be enforced without harming the industry. An EU ban on throwing dead fish back into the sea cannot be enforced without causing industry significant harm, a House of Lords report has said. The inquiry concluded that UK and Scottish governments had not introduced sufficient tools to enforce ban on discards. So in 2013 there was an agreement that fishermen wouldn't throw so much dead waste back into the sea. This is often fish that are caught but are the wrong types and just get dumped back in the sea. It's a huge waste. Hugh Fearnley-Whittinstall actually had this huge campaign, just why throw so much productivity back into the sea? It can be used for other things. So the EU introduced these rules and regulations on not throwing so much dead fish back into the sea. But the problem is how do you regulate it? So we'll read from here. As long as discarding continues, we simply will not know how many fish are being killed at sea, and we cannot protect our fish stocks without dependable science-based and dependable data. Discarding, as usual, could result in the waste of up to 500,000 tonnes of fish in the North Sea every year. This would not only be a massive step backwards for UK fishery management, it would be disastrous for fish stocks, our ocean ecosystems, and ultimately for the UK fishing industry. The report says that in 2013, when the EU legislated to reduce discards, an estimated 1.7 million tonnes of fish and other marine animals were thrown back into the sea each year. They were discarded because fishermen either did not want them or they were not allowed to keep them. Electronic camera monitoring has been trialled on boats as a way of ensuring fish are not discarded overboard, but the industry has resisted making that a permanent measure because there's no way of forcing vessels from other EU nations to install them. The Scottish Fishermen's Federation has insisted that leaving the EU would allow it to put camera monitoring back on the table. So this is the problem. People often talk about, well, if you leave the EU, how are we going to keep up regulation, whether it be workers' rights, the environment? Here we see being a member of the EU actually causing regulatory problems, because yes, we could say in the UK all our fishermen maybe have to be licensed, regulated, have to have cameras on board so we can monitor what they are discarding, what they're keeping. But how do you regulate the Portuguese fishermen, the Spanish fishermen coming up? Because in Spain they're not going to care. This is the problem with the EU. The UK is generally a law-abiding, rule-following nation. You just go into any bank in the UK. The UK is a nation of queuers. People love queuing up. People follow the rules in the UK. When you go to other European nations, yes, they put rules and regulations in place, but you know what? Half the time people don't follow the rules because it's just a different culture. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the UK, we're just a rule-following nation. So yes, we could put cameras and monitor British fishermen, but who's going to put cameras on the Spanish, on the Portuguese, on the French vessels? Because they just don't care, essentially. So here we see EU regulations actually being problematic, because yes, the UK fishing industry does want to monitor, does want to protect UK waters, but it's unfortunate that we see this, a great historical fishing nation, coastal nation, now with the inability to properly fish its waters, fishing waters being depleted. We see a industry dying off. I'm not a person that particularly wants a lot of government intervention into industries, but when you have industries as important as fishing, as farming, if there's things the government can do to maintain these industries, because it's national security at the end of the day, right? We're an island nation, we need food, and you want to be self-reliant as possible. You want a British fishing industry, you want a British farming industry, because who knows in the future? You don't know what's around the corner. You want to be self-reliant as possible. Yes, have imports as well, but you want to be as self-reliant as possible, and just the destruction of the UK fishing industry is no good for anybody. It increases unemployment. It just means more imports. It means a larger trade deficit, just importing more from the EU. Spanish fishermen come to UK waters, catch fish from the UK, take them back to Spain, then we end up importing the same fish back that they caught from the North Sea and the Atlantic off the coast of the UK. It just doesn't make any sense as well. I'm very passionate about the UK fishing thing. I think this is just one of the reasons why a no-deal, clean break Brexit is so good, because we can just take our waters back ASAP. Transitional period will mean it's just going to be years. It's going to be at least 3 years, realistically, before we get any sight of UK waters coming back. Even then, politicians will probably sell out again as they sold out in the 70s. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one. Fishing industry, very important for the UK, worth millions and millions, worth many people's livelihoods. It's destroying vast areas up north, seaside towns. Continual decline as this industry struggles to make any profit. Jason from Liberty Bunkers sign off, and I'll see you in the next video.